gonna yell at you. So
I've
when
been doing
they
it all
packed,
day.
huh?
I've been doing it all day.
I'm used to it, I just want.
They could only bring things like clothes. They brought a food chest because they had to bring all of the food that they were going to need on the ship. They couldn't buy food on the ship. They brought tools to build a garden with, and guns for hunting. Not ever guns for shooting at people because they were pacifists. And part of the reason they needed to leave was because, you know, this is the time of Napoleon. And Napoleon wants everybody in his army. And so that was part of the reason they needed to leave. But they did need a gun for hunting. So they loaded up a cart with their possessions and they started out for the port of Le Havre. I don't know if I'm even saying that right. Okay, we're gonna try it that way. Ooh, that's a funny sound. The trip was about 450 miles, and most of that was done walking, including the little ones, all walking. They paid 190 French francs per person for their trip over. They went down to Le Havre and bought tickets on the ship. And once they found the ship, then they had to wait there until the ship was ready to go, because they were not usually ready to go immediately. What they sailed on were usually cargo ships that had been converted to passenger ships, and they would sail over, and then when they got here, they would dismantle all the stuff that the people had used for sailing, and then they would take cargo back to Europe. So it wasn't a comfortable trip at all. It certainly wasn't a cruise like you guys go on, not anywhere close. They had to do all of their own cooking, and the cooking was done on, let me look at this. It was a little tiny 4-foot wide by 1.5-foot box that was filled with sand. And then they had these little tripod things, and you would put your pot on top of you build your fire under the tripod and then put your pot on top of it. And that's how you would cook your meal. And the women had to cook all the meals. Nobody cooked for you on that ship. You brought all your food with you. You brought dried food, you brought food, you brought preserved food, anything that you were going to need to make it across. And the trip took usually 3 weeks, sometimes longer than that. They slept in berths that had been put on each side of the deck where they were at, and each berth would hold 3 to 6 adults. So it was crowded, and there were lots of berths all in the same room, with toilet facilities at each end, and they would be under a window. But if the weather was not good, then the window got closed. So it could get real nasty in there real fast. Not necessarily a pleasant trip. So they would get over here and they would sail in. Our people sailed into New York. When they got to New York, then they have to make the trip from New York to this area. And that trip was not easy. They did some of it on the Erie Canal. They did some of it on a steamboat that went in Lake Erie. But it was one of the ones with the big paddle wheels, and they said it was very unpleasant. And it would be days on this thing. And remember, when Peter and Catherine are doing this, it's not just them. They've got a 3-year-old and a newborn that they're dragging along through all of this time that they're trying to get here. So getting here was a struggle. So they did it. And after you get off of the Erie Canal, then they had to buy a wagon and a couple of oxen so that they could load the wagon up and they could bring that wagon the rest of the way here. A lot of the Anabaptist people would stop in Holmes County or another Amish settlement on the way. but the Stuckeys didn't. They just came directly here. So they eliminated that stop. I don't know that it did them any good, because when they got here, Peter had bought property. Property was $1.25 an acre. So it was cheap, and that's why they bought in this area. It was way cheaper than it would have been in the other Amish settlements around, because those were all overpopulated by then. There had been a lot of people that had come, but this area had not been overpopulated yet. It was still very sparsely populated. And so land was cheap. But it was also cheap because this is the Great Black Swamp. And so all you find out here is swamp. It was not suitable for farming. And since Peter was a farmer, that really made life difficult. And so, they did what they had to do. When they first got here, they built houses, they cut down trees, and everything we read says the trees out here were so big around that they were so big that men couldn't put their arms around them because they've been growing for so many years. And so cutting the trees down would have been a job. You don't have a chainsaw or anything to work with. You got just a saw. And that would have been really, all these people that have gym memberships, if you'd lived back then, you wouldn't need one. There would be no need for a gym membership. They cut those trees down, and then they made them into logs, and then they built houses, and that's, houses were not big. But imagine the work it took just to build those little houses. Big barns, they built big barns. Those big bank barns that you see around, a lot of them came from that era. And so they put more into their barns than they put into their houses. But they needed them. And Peter, for the first many years that they were here, he planted enough that they could get through the winter. And, Catherine could preserve the food, and they could survive through the wintertime. They could hunt, though. They had meat coming out their ears because this area was full of wildlife, because for years it had been just a wild area. So, you want pheasant? He's got it. You want turkey? He can go get you one. Deer, you can have venison all day long. So you can have all the meat you want. You just can't have as much vegetables as you would like, because that's a little harder to come by. But, they did okay. They added 8 kids to their family during that time, so they brought 2 and they added 8 more. And so their family grew, and everybody else around here was doing the same kind of thing. So it's not like they were the only ones that were doing this. And so then about 1856, the railroad comes through, and Archibald starts to spring up, and they have stores and banks and all kinds of stuff in Archibald. And because the train is here, if Peter had had any crops that he could put on the train, he could have put them on them, and they could have shipped them back east, or they could have sent them to Chicago, and he could have made money. Unfortunately, they still lived in the swamp. So in 1859, a project was started around here called the Ditching Project. That meant that everybody that lived around that area went out beside the road and took their shovels, because we don't have any backhoes, remember. We're not that progressive yet. They took their shovels and they went out and they dug ditches along the sides of the roads. Big, huge, deep ditches. I tell people, those ditches that when you drive down the road and you see this ditch beside you that looks like if you took your car and it went off the side of the road, your car's going to be lost in there and nobody's going to know you're there for days. Well, guess what? Your ancestors dug those. And they did it with shovels. And it took years, and it was hard, back-breaking work, difficult work. But they did what they had to do, and then they went out in the fields and they dug trenches, and they put field tile in. And when they did that, then they had drained the ditches, or drained the swamp. The water would go to the field tile, and that would carry it to the ditch, and the ditch would carry it to the river, and you got the Maumee River over here, you got the Tiffin River over here, and the swamp is drained. And the value of Peter's property went right through the roof. In 1850, the value of his property, everything he owned, was $700. In 1870, the value of his property after they had drained the swamp was $8,400. That's a big difference. And I looked it up. I wanted to see what $8,400 was. In today's money, it would be about $350,000. So Peter had done very well by then. And about that time, their kids are moving out. They're getting married and starting their own families. They're helping Dad with the farming, but they're starting their own families. And so Peter starts a little business. He starts making wagon wheels. And the good thing about his wagon wheels was that they were narrow wheels. And there was still a lot of mud and muck and stuff out here, and you were still going to get stuck. But his wagon wheels, when he made those, that narrow wheel would walk right through the water, and you wouldn't get stuck. So people wanted those wheels, and they would pay for them. Or maybe they'd barter for them, whatever. He made money off of those wheels. So he was, that Peter, he was a smart guy. He had some stuff going on there, So he did okay. And they were considered doing well in society. They had things in their house that told us that they were ready to entertain important people, and that was a big deal back then. But then in 1883, Catherine dies. She is 71 years old, and 71 years, 9 months, and 6 days, actually. And she died of paralysis, and they had been married for 51 years when she died. And, 71 years at that period of time in history would have been a good lifespan. She lived a good long life. But Peter did even better. He died on June 26th of 1892. He was 88 years old, 88 years, 6 months, and 8 days old. So he did even better. And when he died, his obituary says that he had been the father of 12 and 9 survived. We know that the 2 twins had died in France, and we know that they lost a 9-year-old son here. I don't know why the 9-year-old son died. If somebody else does, I would be glad if you tell me, but I don't know. But to only lose 1 out of 10 here is remarkable, because remember, they're in the Great Black Swamp. You've got mosquitoes that are carrying malaria. We're still in the time when you got measles, and you've got all the childhood diseases out there. And they live in a farm, so you can have farm accidents going on. So, could have been any of those things that took the life of that little 9-year-old, but whatever, to only lose 1 is not bad. He also had 73 grandchildren. So we think we're a big family. Imagine their party. And they had 30 great-grandchildren. And then at Sauter's, then I tell people, and after that they had great-great-grandchildren, and great-great-great-grandchildren. And all of you who are my generation, we are all great-great-great-grandchildren. And the ones that are the next generation are 1 more great-grandchild. And it goes on from there. The other day, Sally came and I said, look at this. In here, we've got Peter and Catherine's great-great-great-granddaughters, and their great-great-great-great-granddaughter with Kara, and their great-great-great-great-granddaughter with Ellie. So they did a pretty big thing when they made a choice to come here. And, I remember what a hard choice it was, but look what they did. And look what we all get. You know, we all get to live here and be the family that we are. So I think they gave us a pretty big gift. Yes? Well, I don't know that. I'm not a doctor. You know? Maybe that was a fluke. Who knows? Could be. Anyhow. Yes? What was the question? She wanted to know if Peter and Catherine had twins. How's come none of us had twins? Well, there you go. It's not unheard of. We just don't have a lot of them.
It's like a 1 out of 5.
Yeah.
So where did you get all this information from?
Well, some of it is because I've done genealogy for 40 plus years. And some of it was because they gave me some great information when I went to work there. That they filled in all the gaps on things like what the trip was like and things like that are not personal things, but would have been a general information kind of thing.
Cool.
So, any other questions? They do. They have, if you go to Slaughter's and you go in the wagon wheel shop, in the back, there are some wheels that were made by Peter. What were they called? The wheels? The wagon wheels? They were just narrow wheels. They didn't have a name. They were just narrow. Where typical wheels of that time would have been wide wheels like this, and the ones that Peter made were narrow like this, so they didn't drag the mud up over top of them and bog the wagon down. So in my house at Sauter's, they have it. I don't have things that I think are actually theirs, but they have things that they said would have been in their home. You know, like they had a clock that would have been unusual for that period of time because clocks were expensive. You know, she's got a couple of stoves. She's got one in the house and one in the summer kitchen, and you know, things like that. So you can see those things. And they have the wagon shed that was Peter's wagon shed. The house that I work in is not their original home. It's a home that they're telling me would have been like what they would have had, but this one was from right down the road, and so not so expensive to move. But Peter, because they lived over between Lockport and West Unity, if they could even find that house, it would cost a lot to move it. But I got to tell you this funny story. So I have met so many people who are also descended from Pierre Stuckey or Peter Stuckey in one way or another form, you know. So this man came in the other day. We had a whole group of Amish people that came from Adams County, Indiana. And everybody that came in said, "Has so-and-so been in to see you?" You know, and I'm like, "I don't even know him." No, I don't think so. Well, finally this man walked in, an elderly gentleman, and he's got a notebook, furiously taking notes, and he said, "So, you're descended from Peter Stuckey and Catherine?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "So Peter is the son of Pierre Stuckey?" And I said, "Yeah, he is." I thought, well, he knows something because I didn't tell him. And he said, "Well, Pierre Stuckey also had a son named John. And I am descended from John Stuckey." I said, "Well, look at that. How cool is that?" And he said, "And you know, I'm from Adams County, Indiana, and I've done the research." And he said, "Almost every Amish person in Adams County, Indiana is also descended from John Stuckey, who is the son of Pierre Stuckey. So we're all your cousins. All of us Amish people in Adams County, Indiana are all your cousins." And I said, "How cool is that? So if I come to Adams County, Indiana, I got a place to stay, right?" And he went, "No." That's not how it works. So, but I've met some really interesting people and fun people, and a lot of people related to us. So if they all had come to the reunion, we would have probably another 150 people here. And that's just the ones that have come into Sodders and want to know more about Peter and Catherine Stuckey and Pierre Stuckey and the family. So a number of people that came out as a result of, those two people is just mind-blowing. Just, it blows my mind how many descendants there are just from those two people. And, if you go back one more generation to Pierre, it's even more. So I thought you'd like to know about your family. So